Yeah, it's absolutely right, Brandis. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan ruled state politics for decades. Amid the expanding Comet bribery scheme investigation, Madigan stepped down from two powerful positions this year, the speakership and his role as chair of the Illinois Democratic Party. A new podcast from the Better Government Association tells the story of Madigan and how he ran Illinois politics for so long. And our very own Amanda Vinicky is one of the many journalists featured in it. And joining us to talk about the podcast is Justin Kaufman, producer and host of The Madigan Rule. He's also a reporter for Axios Chicago. Justin, good to see you.
And good to see you, Paris. Thanks for having me.
All right, it's good to have you. All right, so your podcast takes listeners all the way back to Madigan's early days in politics, starting with his time as a garbage truck worker. Explain that.
Well, he grew up on the southwest side of Chicago, down by Midway Airport, the 13th Ward, which is the 22nd district, which he represented. And he came from a family that was political. He had a dad who was a precinct captain, and his first job was he got on the back of a garbage truck. And he worked his way up. He did internships in the law and in the law office, and he got involved with Mayor Richard J. Daley at the time, and found himself as a delegate actually sent to work on the Illinois Constitutional Convention in Springfield in 1970. And that's kind of how he got his start. And, it really is a story about a Chicago, kid who rose the ranks and became a Chicago politician, who became essentially a ward boss, who became the Speaker of the House. Not just the Speaker of the House, but the longest serving state House Speaker in American history, not just Illinois. American history.
America. So what did he learn in those early days that sort of planted the seeds to where he would become so successful as a party boss?
Well, the old adage is all politics is local, but, Mike Madigan took it to the next level. The supersizing of constituent services, making sure that everybody in the 13th Ward was taken care of. And I'm not just saying picking up garbage or making sure potholes are fixed. I was making sure that their kids had jobs, and everyone was essentially, if you worked for the Madigan machine and the Madigan organization, you were able to find I don't want to say reward, but be able to take advantage of patronage, which was the big sort of prize at the time when it came to Chicago politics. So I think obviously super serving his constituents, but then loyalty and discipline and just being around some really impressive political minds. You mentioned Richard J. Daley as the mayor at the time. He also sparred with, in the early days, he learned, he studied under a lot of impressive names, including Phil Rock, including, he was peers with a young Governor Edgar, who was a state rep at the time. And there's a lot of great stories that are told by former governors and lawmakers, current and former, about those days of him coming up.
Yeah, he actually had a good working relationship with the former Republican governor, Jim Edgar. And, that loyalty was built not through hard power or threats, but it seems like through rewarding of jobs. And in your podcast, you talk about how he spent a lot of his workday actually checking up on folks that did work for him or did political work for him and making sure they were set up with jobs.
That was the way it was. That was politics back in the day, right? Before the Shackman decree essentially outlawed and made it illegal that you could reward campaign workers with state jobs, that was what you did. So yeah, he wanted to make sure that he had jobs open at different departments in the state. He wanted to make sure that meant the city. He was all over the place in making sure that his people were taken care of. And in return, they worked harder for him. And right now, the tentacles. You think about the tentacles about all of state government. There's not an office untouched that doesn't have someone that Madigan sent.
They're at every level of government, municipalities, townships, all over the place. Justin, what did you learn that surprised you? There's so much that's been reported on Madigan over the years. Anything from talking to people that worked with him that kind of shocked you?
You and I have covered Mike Madigan our entire careers, and you get to a certain point where you think you've heard it all, or you follow the political characterizations are of him. I learned a ton about who he was as a human being, but also just who he was behind closed doors, how he acted when he was working with his not just his allies but his foes. What I found interesting was how much reverence and respect that old Republicans gave to Mike Madigan. And former governors, George Ryan, former governors, Jim Edgar. They didn't talk of him as maybe a Bruce Rauner would. They didn't talk about him being some adversary that you had to get past. They They talked to him about, they said they loved the fact that Mike Madigan was always a straight shooter. He said what he meant. He didn't lie to them. He wasn't dishonest. He came straight at him with what he wanted to do and what he wanted to get accomplished. And he was always available to make a deal. And when you think about everything that's happened to Mike Madigan in the last just 5 years, from the Rauner administration to the failed fair tax to everything that happened with what continues to happen with the ComEd scandal, people forget about how successful of a politician he was working across the aisle and getting things done for the state of Illinois.
And it looked like those days kind of came to an end, especially under Governor Bruce Rauner, who famously just had a horrible feud with him throughout his entire 4 years in office. And in fact, Rauner told you something in your podcast about a lunch that he had with Madigan before he was governor. What did he say?
Yeah, I didn't, this, and a lot of people in Springfield would be like, they know this, but, Governor Rauner told me, and I got 4 of the 5, living governors to talk on the podcast. Blagojevich was the only one who declined. You
can get him on Cameo, Justin.
Don't think I didn't think about that, Paris. I was thinking. But Governor Rauner talked about his relationship with the speaker before he got into politics. He was Governor Rauner was Bruce Rauner, the philanthropist, and he was raising money for education and he was giving money to Democrats, including Speaker Madigan. And so they would meet for breakfast in the city and they'd get to know each other. And yeah, there were a couple times where Bruce Rauner told a story where he sat down with Mike Madigan and said, "Why do you do it? What is it? What, you don't want to be governor? Why do you want to continue to be Speaker of the House? What's in it for you?" And as the governor says, he says that Mike Madigan just said, "It's no bigger than I manage power and I make money off of managing power." That was his philosophy. That was his ethos when it came to talking to Bruce Rauner at a breakfast at the Chicago club downtown. And there's a lot of stories like that of people talking about Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan, this famously doesn't talk to the media much.
Right.
And so it's really hard to understand.
It certainly seems that was the ends and the means for Madigan, although very surprised that he would actually say that out loud because he's famously circumspect. Lastly, Justin, what is Madigan's lasting legacy now that he's gone?
That's what the core of this podcast is about. It's not a hit piece. It's about, is he the most successful and powerful politician in Illinois history, or is he this corrupt politician who was out for himself and the people around him, and he did that with any means necessary, including the taxpayer money? That's what we don't know. But in this podcast, we're kind of trying to figure out which one kind of, rises to the top and if they can be mutually exclusive. And that's kind of what we get into. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure I have an answer for you, Paris. You might just have to listen to it.
Well, it seems like time will provide an answer to that. We'll see what the legacy looks like in 10 years or 20 years. All right, Justin Kaufman, thank you so much for being here. Good luck on the podcast. Congratulations on the Axios job, too, by the way. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.